So I know we're waiting for a few more people to sign in, but in the interest of time, I'm gonna go ahead and start. So first of all, thank you for joining us today for the first day of action. This is part of our Wild and Scenic Film Festival week of activities. The film festival is on Thursday, and I'll be dropping in the chat later more about that event. What we're going to do first is introductions of our nonprofit guests today. So we'll do name, pronouns, the organization they're representing, whose land their organization exists on, and then a brief visual description for those with low or no vision and those on the phone today. So I'll start. My name is Chris Talbot Heindel. My pronouns are they, them, and I work at Rocky Mountain Wild. I'm the communication and membership manager. I don't know why I always mess that up. 6 years working here and I still don't know my title. And Rocky Mountain Wild is on the unceded land of the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, the Ute, and the Osheti-Shakowin people. And brief visual description, I'm wearing my Save the Bats t-shirt. I'm a light-skinned mixed race individual with salt and pepper hair, tons of freckles, and little clear glasses today, my black headphones, and I'm wearing a flannel over my Save the Bats t-shirt. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Jim.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. Jim Ramey. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the Colorado State Director with the Wilderness Society. Chris, I didn't know, I think we started in our roles with our organizations about the same time. I'm at 6 years in a couple weeks here. It's crazy how the time flies. I'm not quite sure how to do the acknowledgement for the whole of the Wilderness Society, but I'm calling today from my home in Grand Junction, Colorado, which is the ancestral homelands of the Ute people. And for those who may not be able to see me, I also have a flannel shirt on and some clear glasses. I'm a light-skinned white male with a beard and brown hair. Chris, should I pass it to John?
Cool, that sounds good. I couldn't quite get it in the type window anyway, so let's go here. So I'm John Stukowski. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am the conservation director for Wild Connections and live in Salida, Colorado. These are the ancestral lands of the Ute and Arapaho and other indigenous peoples. Oh yeah, and I am a light-skinned white male, long hair, and a blue flannel shirt.
Flannel seems to be the outfit of choice today on this cold day. I did post in the Facebook group that Wilderness Workshop was not able to join us today, but I will be sharing their action and giving everyone contact information to follow up with them. But we're going to go ahead and introduce the action. I have an order of Wilderness Society and then Wild Connections, and then I'll follow it up with Wilderness Workshop. So we'll go in that order. And before Jim starts, I just want to put out a little bit of a content warning for anyone who might be triggered by themes of Native American genocide just before we start, just so people are aware. So Jim, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Chris. Appreciate that. I'm going to try to share my screen and we'll see if I can get this to work, and technology wants to cooperate today. Thumbs up if you could see the PDF. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, John. So again, thanks everyone so much for being here. I'm really thankful for Rocky Mountain Wild for holding this event. This is one of my favorite events every year, and we've been regular participants for the Wild and Scenic Film Festival for many years now. And I just wanted to share a little with everyone today about our work to support the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes in the renaming of Mount Evans and the Mount Evans Wilderness area. Before we dive into all that, do a little bit of brief background on the Wilderness Society. Our mission is uniting people to protect America's wild places. We've been around for something like 86 years now. We're a national organization, but we have a very significant chunk of our staff here in Colorado, in Denver, and Durango, and then a few staff who are now remote from a few places across the state, such as myself in Grand Junction. And we really envision a future where people and wild nature can flourish together. And how we hope to get there is we've recently set some big, bold goals looking out at 2030. Some folks may have heard of the 30 by 30 initiative to protect 30% of our lands and waters by the year 2030, also referred to as the America the Beautiful initiative. So that's one big bucket of work. A second is to make our public lands net zero emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, looking at climate and what's happening right now internationally in Scotland with everyone getting together. Right now, we know that our public lands and waters are responsible for nearly a quarter of our greenhouse gas emissions, and we want to make that net zero again by the end of the decade. And then third is just to try to make our public lands something that benefits everyone equitably. And we know that's not been the case. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this one specific issue today, but we know people have not been at the table and communities have been disproportionately impacted by the negative impacts of, fossil fuel extraction, the naming of geographic features like we're going to talk about today. So really to just try to make sure that the public lands are benefiting everyone equitably. So those are kind of three buckets of work at the Wilderness Society. And I want to share a little more about the Mount Evans Wilderness area and kind of our initial interest in why we got involved in this effort. So the Mount Evans Wilderness was designated in 1980 under the Colorado Wilderness Act. It's a pretty sizable acreage of land, about 73,000 acres, provides habitat for a whole bunch of different species, like the mountain goats in the lower left-hand corner of the slide. And some of the oldest trees you can find, bristlecone pine trees, I guess, in the Mount Evans Wilderness area. The oldest one there is some 1,700 years old, which is just absolutely astounding to me, having gotten to visit that area a few times and see some of those old bristlecone pine trees. It's really incredible. But from the Wilderness Society's perspective, we recently did an assessment looking across the country at wilderness areas in particular, since we've been involved in the designation and creation of pretty much all of those, to try to find which ones may be inappropriately named and maybe caused harm to individuals because of the name that they have. And at the very tippy top of the list was the Mount Evans Wilderness area in Colorado, because it bears the name of former territorial governor John Evans, who, as we talked about, we'll talk about in a minute, was complicit in a absolutely horrific event that occurred in our nation's history and in Colorado's history. So for those who may not be familiar with the story of the Sand Creek Massacre, in 1864, in kind of the tail end heart of the Civil War in Colorado, there were significant tensions between the original inhabitants and stewards of the lands of Colorado, some of the indigenous tribes here, and the white settlers who were coming to Colorado, continuing to settle Colorado. And territorial governor at the time, John Evans, issued a proclamation to kill and destroy all hostile Indians. And in November of 1864, those tensions were really coming to a head. A number of the Cheyenne and Arapaho, who were living on the front plains of Colorado at the time were offered safe refuge along the banks of Sand Creek on the eastern plains. And in late November, they were settled there. There was a few hundred Cheyenne and Arapaho, primarily women, children, elderly individuals. Reports have said that there were only about 100 fighting aged individuals with the tribes there at the time. And Colonel John Shivington took the territorial governor's words and attacked with a few hundred militiamen and murdered more than 200 Cheyenne and Arapaho. Again, mostly women, children, elderly folks. And this became one of the darkest stains on American history and history of the West. An absolutely just horrible, horrible story. And there's much more out there. There's actually a really great documentary on this from Rocky Mountain PBS, if anyone would like greater details on the story and what happened. But Governor Evans was forced to resign in disgrace. And I think it's really unacceptable that so many places continue to bear his name to honor him, most significantly of which Mount Evans, a place on our shared public lands together, one of the most visited 14ers because it's one of only two that has a road to near the top of it in the state of Colorado, and the closest one to the Denver metro area, so very accessible for many folks. So that's just a very brief history of the Sand Creek Massacre. The Wilderness Society, after we identified this as one of the most problematic and harmful named places, we set out about wanting to support the tribes in an effort to change the name of the mountain and the name of the wilderness area, and began talking to representatives with the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes, which are now based in Oklahoma. And there's also northern bands of each, the Cheyenne and the Arapaho in Wyoming. And in early 2020, the legislature of the Cheyenne and Arapaho in Oklahoma passed a resolution supporting the renaming of the Mount Evans and Mount Evans Wilderness as Mount Blue Sky and the Mount Blue Sky Wilderness. And the thinking behind the suggested name Blue Sky from the tribes was that this name could bring the two tribes together. It has cultural significance for both of the tribes, as the Arapaho are known as the Blue Sky people, and the Cheyenne have an annual renewal of life ceremony that is referred to as Blue Sky. So really a fitting name for the mountain and the wilderness area that would be a really suitable replacement for the name that's there now. Shortly thereafter, we worked to support the tribes in filing a formal petition to change the name of the mountain. Included the proclamation language issued by Governor Evans there for reference for everybody, but had that petition filed in late November of 2020. And there is a incredibly bureaucratic and slow process to change the name of geographic features. To do so, you go through this long administrative process, and I'm not going to tell you the whole thing because we would be here for way too long. But there is a obscure federal agency called the U.S. Board on Geographic Names within the U.S. Geological Survey. That federal agency is ultimately the decision maker on proposals to change names of features on lands. And there's a state counterpart board within the Colorado Department of Natural Resources called the Colorado Geographic Naming Advisory Board. And currently that's where this effort sits. The petition has been submitted. It's awaiting review by that state advisory board. That board was defunct for a little while, and Governor Polis fairly recently, within the last year, kind of reestablished it and got it up and running again. So they've been going through the motions of getting their bylaws in order and all of their policies and procedures ready to go so that they can consider these petitions. And just a few weeks ago, they approved their first petition under consideration. And so we're hopeful that they will take up the petition to rename Mount Evans as Mount Blue Sky soon. And I'm going to put in the chat a link to the Colorado Geographic Naming Advisory Board website to submit a public comment, and would encourage folks to share their thoughts and ask them to support the effort to rename the mountain as Mount Blue Sky. And then I also wanted to mention the Reconciliation and Place Names Act. This is federal legislation that the Wilderness Society has supported along with tribes and tribal organizations to expedite this process and improve the ability of the public to participate and bring some additional transparency to it. Venture to guess that many of us don't get the regular updates from the US Board on Geographic Names. I don't even get them, and I've been working in this pretty closely for the last year and a half or so. But wanted to mention that as well as just a separate effort that I think is worthy of support, and hopefully can improve these processes and get these things done a little more expeditiously, because as we know, there are many places that are inappropriately named and causing harm to folks that they really shouldn't be. So we can go about trying to correct that. So with that, would share my emails up on the screen. I'm happy to put that in the chat as well, and happy to take questions now, or Chris, if we want to move on to John or the action from our partners at Wilderness Workshop who couldn't be here today, happy to take questions later too.
Let's go ahead and do the questions now while it's fresh in people's minds.
Great.
And folks, if you have a question, feel free to come off mute or drop it in the chat if you'd rather.
Hi, Jim, it's Terry Parker. I'm just wondering if you guys have like a commenting guide or talking points that we can use on the website, or?
You know, we don't, Terry. I would just encourage folks, it could be as simple as offering your personal or organizational support for changing the name of Mount Evans to Mount Blue Sky and supporting the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes' request to do so. We'd considered creating that action a few times, and I'd hope that we can get that up sometime soon, but I don't have it right now. If anyone has specific questions on what would be most useful or what all a comment should include, I'd be happy to talk, visit with anyone individually.
Great, thank you. Oh, and just out of curiosity, which name did we recently change?
Yeah, the state board just a few weeks ago supported changing the name of Squaw Mountain, which is a offensive, derogatory term toward Native American women that is found in many places on our lands, not just in Colorado, but across the West. But they supported renaming that mountain as Mista'ahe Mountain in honor of a Cheyenne woman. The translation roughly comes over to owl woman, who was instrumental in trading and negotiating peace treaties, and really just a wonderful replacement name. The governor did support that name change, so that will get forwarded on to the federal board for them to decide at an upcoming meeting, and hopefully that will be officially done and finalized in the next few months or within the next year, depending on how slowly things go.
Awesome, thank you.
Jim, I had a quick question. Is there any opposition to the name change?
You know, I've heard of some folks locally in Clear Creek County, which is where this is located, say that they don't like the idea to change it because it, you know, would change history, or it has nostalgia for people who grew up in the area. There have been some other fairly weak arguments about, like, well, search and rescue may not know where to go if we change the name of features, which is just silly. Like, of course, we'll be able to direct them where to go. And during 2020, I think it was late 2020, this was actually in the national news. There was a CBS News piece that ran on this. And the reporter and producer reached out to a bunch of folks to try to find someone to speak from the oppositional frame and to share the reasons why. And they really couldn't find anybody who was willing to go on national news and oppose it. So the local county commissioner, who's I think very supportive of the name change, was asked to present kind of what are the arguments against doing this and what are some of the concerns, and they used his voice. So I think that was instructive that there's not a lot of opposition. There, I think, is some disagreement on what the new name should be. There have been a number of petitions filed with different names suggested. This petition for Mount Blue Sky is the only one that has come from tribes themselves. There are a few other proposals out there. Some support changing it to a name after another individual. I like this one the best. I hope that they pick it.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Suzanne. Suzanne asks, do you know how much about the big blue wilderness that I think was renamed Uncompahgre? I'm sorry, I can't say that. Uncompahgre.
Uncompahgre. Yeah, you said it right.
Okay.
Suzanne, I don't know the full story there. I've heard of that. But if you'd like to share any of that, I'd welcome you to do so. I do know the Uncompahgre wilderness area is one of my favorite in Colorado. Used to live in Montrose, which was just up the road from the Uncompahgre wilderness, and some really spectacular places on our public lands.
Yeah, I don't know much about it either. I just noticed a similarity in the names, but I think it went the other way around, where it was Big Blue and then it became Uncompahgre.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'll have to brush up on my history on that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I think I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, but if we have time at the end, we can also loop back. So John, if you want to introduce your action.
Great, thanks, Chris. And yeah, thanks, Terry and Rocky Mountain Wild for having us. And yeah, I've always been a big fan of your Wild Scenic Film Festival week, and really like to see, or it's been great to see kind of expanded yeah, with these days of actions. And so yeah, thanks for that. I'm gonna attempt to share my screen as well. All right. Does that look good? All right, thanks. All right, and so basically for my action, as it says, is now's the time to pass more wilderness in Colorado. And so I'm going to give a quick overview of the organization I work for, Wild Connections, and then kind of this bigger wilderness package across the U.S. And then specifically kind of how a couple Colorado bills, specifically the Colorado Wilderness Act, fit within this greater wilderness bill, and then kind of the best ways to achieve it, and what folks here can do. All right, and just this picture here is of the Arkansas River Canyonlands. It's kind of the Arkansas River stretch from Salida to Canyon City. There's a lot of BLM managed public lands, and that's where a lot of the proposed wilderness areas are in our region, including here, kind of Table Mountain near and McIntyre Hills. I guess kind of the middle of the photo, and it's the Sangre de Cristo Wilderness is the background mountains. And thanks to EcoFlight for providing this photo and a couple other photos. All right. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm having technical difficulties. Let's try that. Okay. And so Wild Connections, so our mission is to identify, protect, and restore wildlands, native species, and biological diversity in the Arkansas and South Platte watershed. So we're very kind of specific to central Colorado, and with a lot of work on our Forest Service in BLM public lands. This map pretty much outlines our region and shows some of the restoration projects we've done in the area. Kind of note where a lot of that orange is on the map, that's most of it's along the Arkansas River right there, and ones that are WSAs are actually proposed wilderness, so kind of in the center. McIntyre Hills WSA and Great Creek WSA, and we'll get into a few more in a second. And then I guess otherwise, I'm just a note for organization that we'll do restoration projects and lead hikes and other events and advocacy. So definitely check us out and see if we have something going on, especially if you live in this region. So kind of the big wilderness bill right now is the Protecting America's Wilderness Act. And this is actually passed now 4 times in the House in the past 2 years, kind of led by Representative DeGette. And then most recently in September as part of excuse me, of the defense bill. But it's essentially 8 public lands bills. I think this actually that was a little bit outdated, but it would protect about over 1.3 million acres of wilderness and 1,000 wild and scenic river miles. And it's across the U.S., kind of really focused in Colorado, California, Washington. There's a Grand Canyon bill from Arizona and a few other states on the east, and I know it even affects the U.S. Virgin Islands. So it is, a pretty wide spectrum wilderness bill across the nation, and a lot of it is focused in Colorado. Though I think over 1 million acres of the public lands protections are in Colorado, including the CORE Act and the Colorado Wilderness Act. And big thanks to Senators Bennett and Hickenlooper for sponsoring and championing this bill that would add 400,000 acres of public lands protection in our state, including 73,000 acres as new wilderness. And then it does a great job of having some like multi-use areas and protecting some outdoor recreation opportunities as well. And I guess just kind of a quick synopsis, as you can kind of see from the photo, it's a bit all over the state. The CORE Act basically united and improved 4 previously introduced bills, including the Continental Divide Recreation, Wilderness and Camp Hale Legacy Act, the San Juan Mountains Wilderness Act, the Thompson Divide Withdrawal and Protections Act, and the Clear National Recreation Area Boundary Establishment Act. And so this is a great package that our senators are currently promoting, and we should thank them for that. But also in this greater Protecting America's Wilderness bill is the Colorado Wilderness Act, which it does need support in the Senate. And so the CWA has been proposed by Congresswoman DeGette in every Congress since 1999. The current version, 2021 CWA, has 36 areas encompassing 666,000 acres of Colorado public land. The original bill had over 60 areas, so this has been quite refined, and a lot of that due to stakeholder input. And of note, a lot of these like remote and wild areas are primarily BLM managed public lands, which are largely underrepresented as wilderness in Colorado and throughout the US. There hasn't been any Colorado wilderness designated since 2009. And for Wild Connections region, really on the east side from Browns Canyon to Beaver Creek, we've been pretty involved with this since it was introduced in 99. And again, for all of these in our region are specifically in the Arkansas River Basin, and most of them are along the Arkansas River, which is the #1 boated river in the country and provides over 100 miles of gold medal fishing waters from Leadville to Little Pass Canyon City. So it sees a lot of recreation, and it's some incredible scenic viewscapes, not to mention wildlife corridors. So definitely worthy candidates for wilderness, and have been for some time. And one of the things about the CWA is that most of these areas are currently managed by BLM as wilderness study areas and kind of have been since the 80s. And Congress was essentially supposed to give kind of a thumbs up, thumbs down for wilderness study areas in the early 90s, and which never happened. We've seen them threatened in certain states or in. So yeah, these wilderness designations are very much needed in our region. We've seen some recent threats with resource demands that are not congruent with wilderness management. And so kind of specifically, Table Mountain across from McIntyre Hills in the Arkansas River Canyon. It's the largest intact BLM managed public lands in this region, like over 670,000 acres in the and a little bit over 30,000 acres. It's not a wilderness study area, so it doesn't have much protection, and that's kind of been I guess we've seen what can happen without protections. The BLM did find lands with wilderness characteristics for this entire 30,000+ acre area in 2015 for an ongoing management plan, the Eastern Colorado Resource Management Plan. But without proper protection, they gave up 700 acres through a public process. But regardless, 700 acres was lost. That BLM found wilderness character that was in the proposed Table Mountain Wilderness. But it was recently lost in 2019 to hard rock mining expansion along the Arkansas River. And then somewhat more egregious in 2020, this is the Grape Creek proposed wilderness, and also has been managed as the Grape Creek Wilderness Study Area and Grape Creek Area of Critical Environmental Concern by the BLM for quite a while now. But basically, there was last year, there was basically unprecedented exploration in the wilderness study area that kind of happened based on a bogus BLM solicitor's opinion, but a mineral company was able to go into the wilderness study area and basically do gold mining sampling. And this is kind of brought on by the state allowing it in a state section that was proposed for wilderness to the north, which Grape Creek flows through the state section, but that was essentially left out of the most recent addition due to that gold mine exploration. So basically, in real time, we were witnessing the last of our large, unprotected, intact wilderness quality public lands in Colorado being chipped away by resource demands. Otherwise deserving Colorado and U.S. public lands and waters need proper protection. Not just for the lands and wildlife themselves, but for Colorado tourism and essentially, the time to protect these, especially areas like Grape Creek, was decades ago when they were wilderness study areas. But otherwise, we have this incredible opportunity now via the Protecting America's Wilderness Act. And kind of furthermore, this fits right in line with the America the Beautiful Act. This is taken from the Department of Interior's website, but basically it's from President Biden's initiative earlier this year in January to tackle the climate crisis at home and abroad, and that contained this 30 by 30 piece to conserve at least 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. And so, essentially this wilderness package is the down payment we need for America the Beautiful and for 30 by 30. This is the way to have biggest impact on achieving this goal. And otherwise, these public lands, especially in Colorado, have local support. In the most recent conservation in the West Pole by Colorado College, they found the majority of Coloradans, 81%, support public lands protections. and I guess even more so 90% of Colorado support protected areas like national parks and monuments and such. And so it has a lot of support other than kind of at the Senate level. And so that's kind of where we're asking folks to get involved. You know, our senators are the public lands chamber. Let them know that we support this, and they should too. And so this link at the top right here, this coloradowildernessact.org take action, will take you to a page that you can contact, that will send a message to both senators in support. And otherwise, just noting that, especially even this website is been put together from a longstanding conservation coalition that have been working coordination representative to get for years. And so there's more info on that site. And otherwise, CWA is supported by dozens of Colorado conservation organizations, along with many outdoor industry groups and local elected officials and businesses. And we also have a business support letter for folks that are interested in that. We'd love to have additional sign-ons on, and you can contact me at the info below for any of that info. And I think that's everything that I have, and I'd be happy to take it open to questions.
Hi, John. It's Allison Galinsky. I was hoping you could give a quick update on what's going on with the effort to update the resource management plan for Bureau of Land Management lands in Eastern Colorado.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of overlap between some of these proposed wilderness areas and this landscape on the BLM ECRMP. And so the Eastern Colorado Resource Management Plan, which began in 2015, is set to have its final iteration come out to the public next spring. And so we're working closely with partners and the agencies on what that final plan will work with. And actually for this past year, working with others in the conservation community as well as the sportsman's community, we put together a conservation alternative and submitted to the BLM that basically just takes kind of the best tenets of the plan that they've had so far. And so we're hoping they're able to utilize that moving forward. But otherwise, yeah, we're expecting that out in maybe April at the earliest. And yeah, I definitely look forward to seeing some protections on some local protections on these BLM managed lands.
Hi, John. There's a question in the chat from Jean. Jean asks, I've heard there is some opposition to the CWA from ?
Yeah, I guess the long-standing reason that it hasn't had the I guess support in the Colorado Senate as it has in the House has just really been that it's I guess as we see on the map here, that it encompasses a lot of Colorado, especially Western Colorado, and some of these areas have unfriendly county commissioners to wilderness, which it's kind of been historic to a lot of the current wilderness we have. There has been initial local elected opposition, but essentially, especially in time, a lot of them have recognized the value in it. But more so, we can't just depend on 3 people in each county making all the decisions, and that's essentially why we kind of have this grassroots campaign with Wild Connections just kind of serving this region in central Colorado, but otherwise there's organizations out in Western Colorado and elsewhere in the region, and gathering support from locals and support from the business leaders, and especially in a state that has really embraced outdoor recreation and tourism. We need to kind of think long-term and protect these lands and waters.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, so let's move on, and then we'll circle back if anyone has questions later. So from Wilderness Workshop, I have an action that they wanted to share, but they had last minute issue and couldn't attend. So I'll just read off the action and then drop the links and the contact information in the chat. So the Crystal River has withstood the test of time to become one of Colorado's last untamed natural wonders, and protecting it as a wild and scenic river would keep it that way. So join Wilderness Workshop in supporting wild and scenic protection for Crystal River. I'm going to drop their petition in the chat real quick. Yep. And if you have any questions, you can contact Grant, and I'll drop Grant's email in the chat as well. So just want to check in, see if anyone had some additional questions. I'll leave some time. Okay, I have a question from Jean. Would it help for us to write our county commissioners in support of the CWA?
Hi, Jean. Yeah, that would always help for sure. I guess part of it's tough, and especially because there's a lot of support in Colorado as kind of represented by the conservation in the West Pole, over 80% for these sort of designations. And so it definitely it helps for our county commissioners to hear from us on these sort of issues. I guess the point I'm trying to make is it helps more so if you're in some of these counties that are more contentious to wilderness. And I guess again with that said, it's it shouldn't just be up to the county commissioners to determine if these lands are going to be designated wilderness. It's and truthfully, it's not being federal land. It's not just Colorado. Given we should have a fair say for sure. But these are federal lands, and to be used by everyone, whether they're citizens or not.
Allison shared in the chat, the Crystal River flows along Highway 133 south of Carbondale. It is very beautiful, and I've seen herds of bighorn sheep along the river. So just one more reason to sign that petition. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little bit about the Wild and Scenic Film Festival, which is happening on Thursday, and some of the other activities. If you want to take more action, we have 2 more days of action. I'm going to drop that in the chat. So tomorrow at noon, and then the 3rd at noon as well. We'll have more actions. So tomorrow we have actions with Endangered Species Coalition, Colorado Wildlands Project, and Center for Biological Diversity, which will be helping with wolf restoration, protecting Colorado's Bureau of Land Management land, and cleaning up Colorado's air. And then on the 3rd, we have actions from Defenders of Wildlife and Simple Switch. Defenders of Wildlife will have an action to help protect biodiversity, and Simple Switch will help you make the move toward waste-free life. And then we have an auction going on for Wild and Scenic Film Festival as well. So there's a lot of great items in there, including the very last Gunnison Sage Grouse Hero t-shirt. So it's a collector's item officially, or at least I'm saying so. So I dropped the link in the chat. And then the last thing is the film festival itself. So that happens on Thursday at 7 p.m. and it's my favorite event of the year. I highly recommend it. We'll be screening 5 films. They're all excellent, and I am biased, but I think you'll find them excellent as well. And I'll drop that in the chat as well. So this is where you can get tickets. And then I want to leave some space if anyone has questions that came up for them. Okay, well, thank you so much for spending your lunchtime with us and taking direct action. And huge thank you to Jim and John for sharing their actions with us. And we hope to see you at further days of action or during the film festival. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chris. Take care, everyone.